Well, hi everyone. My name's Alona Ross, and I'm here. I'm so glad that everybody is here tonight. And we're here with Ron Deutsch of New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness and Sandy Oxford, a community activist, and she specializes in, she has a lot of experience with these things. And we are here with, of course, Senator Skoufis, who is really active in trying to, I think, change legislation and clean up some of these problems in Albany. So I'd like to pass it over to Ron Deutsch. Oh, and Cheryl Schneider, thank you so much for running the show, because I don't know what we would do without you. Thank you. So Ron Deutsch, go.
Sure. Well, thank you all for being here. Again, my name is Ron Deutsch. I'm the acting director of New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness. Prior to that, I ran a group called the Fiscal Policy Institute, and we've done a lot of work around economic development programs across the state, looking at their efficacy and whether or not we're getting a good bang for our buck in many of these programs. And I think that, this obviously is to look at the Kingstonian and a specific project going on in the city of Kingston through the Industrial Development Authority. So, but what I want to do is really talk about a little bit why this is kind of emblematic of what's happening across New York State right now. There are countless problems going on with economic development programs, and we really feel like it's time to kind of reevaluate, reform, and redefine, as well as reallocate these funds for different purposes. So when we talk about kind of redefining economic development, we're talking about thinking about economic development in a different way. It's not, here developers or here businesses, here's a bucket of money, please come to New York or stay in New York or move 5 miles down the road and stay in this county. There's a wide variety of issues there around economic development. But in terms of redefining it, I think what we really want to do is talk about it in terms of things like, tax abatement and exemption and subsidy programs just don't work. We know the research is out there for that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we need to start advocating for investments in public goods, in particular, early childhood education, K through 12, higher education, the public workforce, childcare, home care. These are all higher return investments and better investments for the state. Right, our state right now is spending between the state spends around $4.5 billion a year on about 66 different economic development programs. Local governments are spending about $5.5 billion a year. We're talking about $10 billion annually. And now's the time really to reform this broken system. Whether we're, we should be saying that, business subsidy programs have really been politicized. They've been beset by scandal and have massive ongoing corruption risks. They are just simply a waste of public funds in many instances. And there really is no such thing as free money. I know we all talk about, oh, well, they're just not going to pay their taxes, but that has a trickle-down effect on everybody else. And, why should we be advantaging one business over another in a community, right? I mean, it basically sets up an uneven playing field. And I would say New York is also ripe for reform right now, because we've spent more on these $50 million plus mega subsidy deals than any other state. So we've spent about 12 billion between 2000 and 2017. And with very, very, with results that we would not desire. So over the years, in particular the last 10 years that Governor Cuomo, he really kind of created an economic development system on steroids here in New York. So we really kind of ramped up economic development with, very questionable outcomes. So, back in 2013, the governor impaneled the Tax Reform Commission. And, noted economists like Don Boyd and Marilyn Rubin, they basically did the research, and they firmly stated that there is no conclusive evidence from research studies conducted since the mid-1950s to show that business tax incentives have an impact on net economic gains to the state above and beyond the level that would have been attained absent these incentives. So again, these don't work. A report from the independent W.B. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research basically analyzed tax incentives for economic development during 2015, and they concluded that New York's were the most expensive and second least effective nationwide. We know that many of these economic development incentives have been at the center of various pay-to-play scandals. One of the most salacious scandals that we've seen was Governor Cuomo's top aide, Joe Percoco, who was charged with accepting more than $300,000 in bribes, including a $35,000 bribe from Core Development in Syracuse. There was a conviction there. Also, our nanotech czar, you may remember, Elaine Calleros, he was also convicted of a bid rigging scandal to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, nearly $1 billion, and that Buffalo billion, as we remember, was caught up in that. And then also in May of 2017, the comptroller did an audit. And what did he find? He found that ESDC failed to meet more than half of the reporting requirements for tax credits and job creation programs, including independent evaluations of the efficacy of these economic development programs. So we know after years of looking at this, right? We saw what happened in Buffalo, right? We had the Buffalo billion. We're giving a billionaire more money, and in the form of Elon Musk and Tesla. And what happened there? We invested all of that money up front. We bought equipment for Tesla that they were going to use to make solar panels. Guess what? They decided that they didn't want that equipment. So we have $200 million in equipment that we are not going to be using, that we need to get rid of. We've created film hubs in Syracuse for $15 million that was recently sold for $1. And we've seen things like a $90 million factory that taxpayers built for Sora LED lighting company, which walked away from the deal with no penalties. Not to mention all the money that we're providing to Amazon warehouses for their siting all around the state, which they would be coming here regardless. So, I think there's major problems inherent in our economic development system, not the last of which, speaking of Amazon, would be these opportunity zones, which I know Ilona is going to be talking about as well, as this project is availing themselves of that. But they were basically created in the 2017 tax bill. And they were designated, to have a stated goal of revitalizing distressed areas by attracting investors and corporations who can avoid basically paying capital gains tax on these investments. And many of these zones are already located in kind of gentrifying areas and places that don't need additional stimulus. But Amazon has become expert at taking advantage of this. And, New York is one of those states where Amazon is taking advantage of this. And Amazon's built about 933 facilities across the US. 153 of them are located in opportunity zones. So you've got so many of these businesses taking advantage of these programs, which we are, just continue to keep offering, right? I mean, with very little results to show that these are effective, if none at all. But we keep doing the same thing over and over again. I recall that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is like the very definition of insanity. So I think, now is the time to kind of stop that insanity and move forward. Very excited to see Senator Skoufis here. I know he's been a champion for reform and continues to be on a lot of these economic development programs. So I'm happy he's joining us, and I'm happy to be taking part in this. And I think that, Ilona Ross is to be commended here. I mean, we need more people who are these type of, citizen activists who are questioning these deals. So many of these deals don't get questioned. They just go through, they're pushed through. And yet it's a detriment oftentimes to the locality in terms of, return on investment. So I think we need to start thinking about things differently. And instead of investing in projects like this, start thinking about investing in early childcare or K through 12 education, pre-K, things of that nature. So I think those are important things to think about against the backdrop of what we're talking about here today.
Thank you so much, Ron. Speaking of childhood education, I would point out that you may have a fact sheet. Do you have a fact sheet that was dropped in? Certainly, it looks like the Kingston School District is going to lose almost $15 million out of this particular pilot. And that's been the loss to Kingston School District is 14,891,000 roughly. And the other issue that I'd like to bring up is that we really don't know what the cost is. I tried to reconcile the cost of pilots in the Kingston School District, in the different school districts in Ulster County. It was virtually impossible because the IDA information did not match the school board information, which did not match the tax roll information. And I shouldn't have to look on page 56 or page 58, I guess it is, of the annual county report. I believe it's called the CAFR report. I shouldn't have to look there to find only the amount of money that Ulster County says it spends every year, or rather, let me rephrase that it loses every year on revenue because of pilots. I mean, this is crazy. It should all be in one place. It should be easy to find. It shouldn't be like having to look for a needle in a haystack. And speaking of opportunity zones, there are two reports by a company called NDC, the National Development Corporation. And the first one found a loss to the community from this project, $3.4 million. The second one managed to eke out a small gain of $256,000. But at the same time, it says they're not enriching themselves. I can't remember the word, unreasonable. I believe they're not enriching themselves unreasonably. But that's because they don't look at exactly what you talked about, which is the opportunity zone, because the payoff is going to be immense. The St. Louis Fed finds that multifamilies double in value every 10 years. So if they sell in 10 years from now, let's say it costs this project is $60 million to build. If they sell in 10 years, that's 120 million. And after the mortgage, they're basically not going to pay anything. Now, maybe they'll pay a little something in tax, but not very much. They're walking out with a huge profit. The same thing happened at Golden Hill, which is another property but that wasn't an opportunity zone, but the appreciation, the guy bought it, it was private. Once again, it was privatized. And he bought it, I think he spent, I don't know what he spent, but he walked out with at least, I think, about a $30 million profit after a few years when he sold to a nursing home company. I mean, basically, this is about privatization of land, of cash, and of, in the case of the Kingstonian, of parking in particular. So let's see, Sandra, why don't you talk to us? Tell us.
Well, good evening. Thank you for the invitation, and it's nice to be here with everyone. My name is Sandra Oxford. I live right on the imaginary line on the other side of the town of Wawarsing in Sullivan County. I live in Fallsburg. I live in one of the 10th highest tax communities in New York State. So this whole idea of tax abatements and the additional burden on taxpayers is something that it became a vocation for me. It's not anything like Ron, where I've had formal education or training. It's been about 30 years now of really pulling back the curtain on it was earlier, my experience was with the Empire Zone projects, and a wonderful legislator who passed away last year, who was Richard Brodsky. And Richard Brodsky did a lot of work in the 90s, in the late 90s, with many of us, educating us on corporate welfare and why we were not getting, maximizing these with these subsidies that we were giving out. In my community where I live, where I've become very sensitive, is what is the impact on workers, and what is the impact on my neighbors who actually go into these development projects and work there. I very quickly discovered that my taxes were subsidizing poverty wages, abuse of workers, and quite a bit of wage theft that sadly New York State was not prepared to deal with. In the state of New York right now, on any given day, we are only able to return about 12% of wage theft. And that's not because we don't want to help workers return the money that some of these egregious employers are taking for them. It's just we don't have the capacity in the state. Our Department of Labor does not have the capacity to serve the citizenry. So there's about 88% of workers out there that often are never given back money. And we see in a lot of these tax subsidized projects that some very bad actors make their way in there. I live in an area where tax abatements have created a disposable workforce. And I say that, unfortunately, poverty and employment should never go hand in hand in the same sentence, but many of our neighbors are employed and they're still living in poverty. This is unacceptable. I've joined a movement, and it is a bit of an informal movement. I think that it is time for it to become a formal movement, and that is the movement of demanding community benefit agreements in all of our communities. In the absence of having a strong statewide legislative protections and provisions. And I'm so thankful that Senator Skoufis is on. Right now, Senator Skoufis is one of the few elected officials who is willing to have these courageous conversations. And they are courageous conversations, and it's very messy what is happening at the grassroots level in at least in my backyard and in your front yard over there with the Kingstonian. So I just want to talk a little bit about what a community benefit agreement looks like, because they look very different all over the place. They ensure that the wages that folks are going to be making are living wages. I serve on a not-for-profit board that had to, about 4 years before we signed Governor Cuomo, the former governor's minimum wage standard, that we were doing the fight for 15. Well, because there were other counties where this not-for-profit wanted to do business, you had to be sure that you were providing a living wage. That shouldn't be a dirty word with a developer. It's something that I think that many community people can get behind. We know that it's a multiplier. We know that when we look at the workforce and when we create these pipelines for training workers, and to be sure that we have local hires and that we have local people that are going into trades that actually pay living wage. There's a great deficit in our region. Right now in our region that we are in, we do not have an adequate pipeline for tomorrow's operating engineers. And if you look at prevailing wage in many counties, many operating engineers, they start out in their cranes and in their bulldozers at like $60, $65 an hour. And these are game changers for families. These are the types of jobs that if we partner correctly with developers, and we can ensure that young people that we know who may need a little bit of support as far as the equity and the inclusion into these vocations. But this is where the community benefit agreement comes in. And this is the strength. And this is where we can dream. And this is a very good place for us to be in right now. I feel that at a state level, we can begin forming this idea of really reforming the IDAs and reforming how we dole out abatements, but also how we engage the communities and what becomes prioritized, and how we ensure that Ron was talking a bit about the human infrastructure. How does the human infrastructure get woven into our community benefit agreements? How are we going to be sure that we have quality care for all of our workers who enter the workforce. And what can these developers and these megalithic projects do to enhance the human infrastructure? At the other spectrum of the human infrastructure is the care, the health care, the elder care. So, you know, I come from more where the grass meets the roots, and that has been my experience. Sadly, I live in the shadow of what I think is a very failed economic development project here that gave away tremendous tax abatements and unnecessarily. You know, we don't have to give money to casinos to come to a community. We don't have to give money to an Amazon to come to a community. They're going to come here anyway. And to give away these opportunities on the backs of taxpayers in the middle class and the working class, we have to interrupt this. So I think we need to formulate how we develop a movement in demanding that the community does benefit from these economic development opportunities that are happening. Thank you, Alona.
Thank you. Well, you mentioned a couple of things, and Jim, I see your hand is up. I'll get to you in a minute, but Senator Skoufis, I hope you're listening, because there is something in the law. Sandra, you mentioned something about empire zones. Well, there's a loophole in the IDA law that allows a district to be considered distressed. And yes, those are some serious air quotes. If it was ever an empire zone, it's buried deep in the IDA law. So because of that empire zone designation that Kingston once had, the Stockade District, which is one of the most gentrifying, wealthiest, beautiful areas where houses are going, on Wall Street for, more than $1 million now, but it's considered an empire zone. Therefore, it's able to get a distressed designation, which allowed local government to push this pilot through. Now, you also talked about living wages. So living wages, I think we know for Ulster County, I believe, and I'm doing this from memory, forgive me if I make some mistakes, it's $15.44 for one person. And I believe once you have a child, for a single person, it goes up to $33. That's according to the MIT calculator that I looked at. Well, these developers are very proud that they're offering a living wage of $15 an hour to all their employees. So they say they're going to be creating 40 permanent jobs, of which, again, this is from memory, I believe 84% are living wage. I think that turns out to 33.6 jobs at $15 an hour. So they're not going to be able to live, those people aren't going to be able to live in Kingston, much less the Kingstonian. Now, let's talk about living wage for the construction workers. And they also are going to be very lucky to have a living wage of $15 an hour. And you think that some of them would get prevailing wage? And yes, 10% of the 150 construction workers that the developers estimate they're going to be hiring, they will get prevailing wage, 10%. Now, why would that be? Because in the budget that Governor Cuomo passed, and I believe it was April 3rd of 2021, he carved out an exception for projects that receive Downtown Revitalization Initiative money. So that was, clearly a bone he threw to his real estate pals. So there's no requirement for prevailing wage. And I looked, I printed out some prevailing wages. And once again, they're more like a living wage for a person with, one child. They're, for laborers, they're upwards of $30 an hour. Maybe they're between like 30 and 40, and even above 40 for electricians, for carpenters, for laborers. But no, we're not going to be getting, the construction workers are not going to be getting that here. They're going to be getting $15 an hour. So it's the whole thing is a racket. And meanwhile, depending on how long they hold it, these developers who were putting in $6 million of their own cash are going to walk out after, if they sell in 10 years after the mortgage is paid, they're going to walk out with, probably 100 million, maybe 90 million. And if they hold it for another 10 years after that, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars, because the opportunity zone is not factored in. The profit, long-term profit, is never factored in, and that's wrong. I mean, they tell you what they go out of their way to tell you all the great things they're going to do for your community. And they never bother to tell you the great things that are going to happen to their bottom line. And that's wrong, because what's going to happen to their bottom line far exceeds what's the good that's going to happen to our community, because there probably isn't that much good, because as Ron said, these projects don't work. There's, you mentioned the Upjohn Institute. That was probably, yeah, no, there are a lot of studies and it shows it just doesn't work. We saw that at the Senate hearings that Senator Skoufis was at, I believe it was 10 days ago on that Friday. It was really something else to listen to some of that testimony. So Jim, you still there? Hi, Jim. Can someone, Jim, unmute yourself? So Jim is the school board president, by the way. You've got your hand up, Jim. Jim, you got to unmute yourself.
You have to allow me to unmute.
Oh.
So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, you allowed me to. So I just want to make a comment about your I'll just call it a claim, because I'm sure it's true, but that these housing developments double in value every 10 years. Now, the calculation of the tax abatement for the Kingstonian is based on an assessment of $19 million over the 25 years. But if it doubles every 10 years, then in 10 years, the assessment should be $38 million. In 20 years, it should be $76 million. And in 25 years, it should be $100 million. And that's what the tax savings should be based on. It shouldn't be based on $19 million, for 25 years. It's corrupt.
Now, my figures come from the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and obviously it's not every 10-year period they double, but on average, it's every 10 years. If they raise interest rates, who knows what could happen. But the fact that it's going to stay at the assessment will stay at $19 million for 25 years it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I just want to say, so some hotshot people here, high-powered people, when I use the word corrupt, I am using the second definition in Merriam-Webster's dictionary of corrupt as an adjective, which is putrid or tainted. And these economic development projects are corrupt. It stinks to high heaven. And, we're here 2 days before the final vote, probably, that's going to let them put shovels in the ground. I don't know what to do. But I'll shut up now, and I'd like to hear from Senator Skoufis for sure.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for inviting me, Alona. And it was great to hear from both Ron and Sandy, both of whom I've worked with for some time. And they both hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways. I can't speak to the Kingstonian too much. It's not in the Senate district I represent. Certainly, I've read about it in the paper and I've heard from, some school board members and folks in Ulster County. And but there's no doubt that there are so many projects that in an unwarranted way are getting subsidies that we're all paying for. And the economic development folks like to present IDA benefits as an either-or situation. Either we don't have the project and you have this parcel of land that's often undeveloped, paying X dollars in low taxes, or we get this great pilot. And the pilot's so much larger than what the vacant property is paying us in property tax. So of course we should support the pilot. And it's, I think, very clearly purposefully, this false dichotomy that they present to the public. We all know that those are not the two options. And a oftentimes very viable option is either no pilot and they pay the full property tax bill, they're coming anyway, or a better pilot, But that's never part of the conversation that you'll hear from the IDAs most of the time, or folks like at the Orange County Partnership and these other, these other economic development organizations that seem to be really prevalent for whatever reason around here in the Hudson Valley, but certainly exist elsewhere in the state too. And my committee and we did an investigation into. I chair the investigations committee into public authorities back in 2019, of which IDAs are a public authority, and we really did focus on IDAs in that effort. And I encourage anyone to read the report. It's on our committee website. But I want to pull one section that really, I think, illuminates the corruption that the school board member just spoke about before. And there are two types of corruption, right? There's illegal corruption, but make no mistake, there's legal corruption that exists, especially in this space. And there was an Orange County project. They had an application at the town of Montgomery, or they wound up having an application at the town of Montgomery IDA. That's after, by the way, leaving the Orange County IDA because they were shopping around and figured they were going to get a better deal from the town of Montgomery IDA. But first, they were with the Orange County group, and the Orange County IDA executives, they were actually coaching this company, Medline, on what to say to Empire State Development to get the state incentives for this project. And we know this because we got the emails where this coaching took place. And the IDA told this Medline higher up, quote, "Please use this sentence today." They were meeting with ESD the same day. "Please use this sentence today. Medline has interest in retaining and expanding operations in Orange County, pending competitive New York State incentives and an IDA pilot. The company has competing interest from New Jersey." They literally gave them a script to memorize and recite to Empire State Development to get state incentives. That's how corrupt or corrupted this process is. And these folks at Medline, they were applying for well over $10 million in property tax breaks. My committee got involved. We threatened subpoenas to them. We issued document requests to them due by a certain deadline. Otherwise, we were going to subpoena them. And lo and behold, with the threat of having to sort of be dragged in front of the investigations committee and answering questions publicly after being issued subpoenas, on the same day that the documents were due to us, they withdrew the IDA application that they had at the town of Montgomery IDA. And lo and behold, they continued and moved forward with construction of their warehouse project. So they didn't get any IDA benefits, if not for the activism on the ground. A group called Residents Protecting Montgomery, and the work that my committee did, they would have gotten away with it. And the sad part is how many companies are, quote unquote, getting away with it because there is not an organized effort in that community to try and scrutinize IDA applications, because the investigations committee can't be everywhere in the state and look at every single application. There must be a better way, because right now, the way this system works is the IDAs, not all of them, but I venture to say most of them, or even the large majority of them, do not care if their taxpayers get ripped off. All they care about is whether they land the project. That is it. And they get folks from the county economic development office. They get these companies have lobbyists. They hear from oftentimes stakeholders in these projects who are due benefit if the project moves forward. There is no taxpayer organization. It doesn't like the taxpayers don't have a lobbyist to make sure that the IDAs are being held accountable to them, the folks who ultimately foot the bill for these subsidies. In the Senate district I represent, I have tried to be that person, but there are 63 Senate districts. It's not happening in most of them. So look, there was a package of reform bills, IDA reform bills that passed the Senate last year. Unfortunately, I think all but one of them did not pass the Assembly last year. And these were, I think it's fair to say, on the more modest side when it comes to reforms. These weren't, we weren't looking to even flip over the table as much as I'd like to do that when it comes to IDAs. And we can only get one of these bills through the assembly. We couldn't even get, unfortunately, a bill that would just simply ban elected officials from serving on IDA boards. If, we often talk about conflicts of interest. There is no more obvious conflict of interest than when an elected official is serving on an IDA board. And I know that firsthand because my last election, I ran against a county legislator, the chairman of the county legislature, who was on the Orange County IDA board for decades. And surprise, surprise, what happens? He announces he's running for state senate, opens up the IDA Rolodex, pulls up all these companies. Oh, remember the time I helped give you a 10-year pilot or a 20-year pilot? I'm running for state senate now and I could really use a $5,000 check. So we couldn't even get that passed through the state assembly. So what I'm trying to get, this is a long-winded way of what I'm trying to get at here, is there needs to be a real awakening throughout the state from taxpayers. Ron has done great work. Sandy has done great work, and especially in her community here in the Hudson Valley. But we need people to get more engaged on this throughout the state and talk to their lawmakers and say, what are you doing to protect my tax dollars? And I don't think enough people are doing that right now. I am making economic development reform my top issue this year in the 2022 session. I know that there are some new groups that are forming around this issue to try and push reforms, which I'm very happy to see. But this is the time to make it happen with a new governor. The last governor, economic development is one of his sort of badges of, he would call it honor, I would call it dishonor. And it was politically impossible, seemingly, to try and get any reforms done in this space. With him gone now, I'm hopeful that there's an opportunity. So, so anyway, I've said enough. I'm happy to, interject if people want me to as this moves forward. But Ron and Sandy, thanks for what you're doing, and everyone else who's involved in this effort.
I would like to reach out to you about some ideas moving forward on legislation and on referenda, because I believe that we have certain rights as people to have referenda in counties and the states. But when you talk about corruption, putrid corruption, I can't believe it, but it turned out to be a 15-minute dissertation on corruption on the cast of characters with the Kingstonian. And I'm just going to read you the top of the 5 patterns of bad behavior that permeated this process were firing people who disagreed. They fired people on the Landmarks Commission, the Kingston Local Development Corporation. And for those of you who don't know, the local development corporations are other authorities like the IDAs, which basically fly under the radar. And these are groups where people give away your money in projects that you wouldn't like, and they do it under the cover so nobody knows about it. The other thing they did was they concealed their tactics with the process to make the process go through. They really were very non-transparent about it. The last thing they did was they chilled public participation as best as they could. And we saw that most recently with a rigged public hearing where they refused to allow a hybrid hearing at the height of the Omicron wave. And what happened was that all the supporters of the project came out who really didn't care about Omicron, while the opponents of the tax break stayed home. And they tried to say, well, this shows that the public really wants the Kingstonian. Unfortunately for them, Kingston citizens had a petition going, and they got more than 200 signatures asking for it to be hybrid. So anytime there's been an election, in fact, that's been viewed as a referendum on the Kingstonian has lost. So, for example, David Donaldson, the Ulster County Legislature chair, he was booted. And as you know from the school board election, the challengers were essentially there to hold a new vote on the Kingstonian to reverse the vote that the school board, when the school board on December 2nd, I believe, of 2020, you voted down that pilot. And they tried, so the developers tried to field 2 candidates to turn that vote around, to hold a new vote. It didn't work, thank God. And then the last thing, of course, is, well, not the last thing, they presented, the fourth thing, they presented questionable benefits and they lied, a lot of lies in there, like threatening, and Mayor Noble is still doing this in his last letter. He threatened that the DRI $10 million grant would be withdrawn if the Kingstonian didn't go through. I have a letter, I have an email from the Department of State saying, no, that's not what happens. What happens is that it's reallocated to another project. And then the last thing, you talk about conflict of interest, Senator Skoufis. Well, we have, talk about just in time dropping off of committees where otherwise you would be accused of conflict of interest. For example, the developer sat on the DRI commission just to make sure that he was going to get part of that, $10 million DRI grant. And he dropped off when people complained about, the blatant conflict of interest, but he's actually still sitting on a DRI traffic committee. I have the name, so I'm sorry, I don't remember that name exactly. And it decided what kind of traffic was supposed to take place on the drive right near his project. So he was able to, to decide where the roundabout should go. So another bit of conflict that was pretty egregious was from Mayor Noble. He announced in March of 2019, he announced the results of the planning board vote on SECRA. Some of you know what SECRA is. It's an environmental review process. The only problem is the vote didn't take place until 9 months later in December of 2019. But he told the Democratic committee, you can expect a negative vote on SECRA. And SECRA, the environmental review, is something that developers do not want. And they may not have wanted it in particular for this project because the soil is really not suited and it costs a lot of it's probably going to cost a lot of extra money. Because the soil is lacustrine soil, which means it's like toothpaste. And I asked the engineer during a meeting, I said, what did you think of the geotechnical engineer's report that really the soil was, not really suitable? And his name, that's Dennis Larios, and he had the honesty to say, well, I didn't read it. So that's the project engineer who didn't read his own geotechnical report. And afterwards, as I was leaving, I heard Brad Jordan yell, really berating him, saying, why did you say that to her? And Larios was saying, well, she put a microphone in my face. Yeah, that's what I do. I put microphones in people's faces and sometimes they tell the truth. So that's just one example of the corruption. So yeah, they fired people on the ID. There were several IDA members who did not want this project to get a pilot, and they got booted. They were fired and they were replaced. This was all planned in advance. The same thing happened in the local development corporation. There was one person who actually resigned. He used the word murky because he said he didn't want to be involved in anything murky. That's, that's pretty telling. And then somebody else who also opposed the tax break was let go. And Mayor Noble said, well, you don't align with our vision. So, and the same thing happened on the Landmarks Commission because they wanted a SECRA review and he didn't, and he fired them also. And he said, he tried to say that he didn't fire them, that he just let them go, but he fired them. I could go on. I've got 40 minutes of corruption stories, but I think probably, does anybody have any questions?
Ilana, I just want to say that everything that you've shared for just an ordinary citizen can be quite intimidating. Dealing with county planners, developers, the private sector, for profit, in part of what, I don't know if this is in any of the senators, if this is in the landscape of reform. However, part of what we need at the community level, at the grassroots level, is almost like a bit of a boot camp. I've had the luxury of having like 20 years of fighting these things and just like having a affinity for these conversations. However, I think that we really need to create a bit of a groundswell here with our neighbors and with the other folks who are going to be impacted by this. And how do we develop capacity within our communities so that way there is this Senator, this question might be to you, like, so how do we create capacity within the community for more self-advocacy? So we have access to training, so we have access to information, and we can be better at being the guardians and being sure that our communities are not going to be the next community that winds up tying their hands to these terrible deals.
Senator Skoufis, go. And I know Bruce and Jim, I see you, but this question was for the senator. So how do we unmute you? Or you unmute yourself? Cheryl.
Yeah, Cheryl has to unmute, but thanks. So how do you create that capacity? Look, I think that it really, it's a full-time job, quite frankly, where you need at least one person who is watching over the IDA agendas and combing through the IDA applications and making, at least sort of a preliminary, if nothing else, determination. Is this a raw deal or not? And look, there are some common red flags to look for in these applications where you can determine that. And Sandy, I'm sure you're aware of some, if not most of them, given your work. But just for myself, for example, my office, we've requested and we do get the agendas ahead of every single IDA meeting within our Senate district. Rockland County, Orange County, Ulster County, Town of Montgomery, City of Newburgh. We get all those agendas before, and I personally and my staff, we go through every single one of them and the applications and track, them as they move forward and flag the ones that we have problems with. If you don't know what's going on, you don't know whether to get involved. And so, I think every region of the state needs someone who is doing that. And then the rest is about lighting a fire under people. And that's something that, I think there's a lot of existing infrastructure in place, at least in most parts of the state, where we can do that, whether it's through school boards or through organized labor or, through the party committees. But I think one of the first barriers that most communities face is they have no idea what's going on at their IDAs. And so you need someone who's going to let people know what's going on. The Kingstonian, look, it blew up. It was very high profile. But I can tell you, there are other IDA projects or applications within Ulster County that have not blown up, that deserve a lot of attention. One of which I'm very engaged in the town of Marlborough in the Senate district, where you've got this project. It's called Bayside, and it is a residential development that would be unprecedented in Ulster County. It would be the application. However many decades the Ulster County IDA has been around. I think 40, 50 years, whatever it's been. This would be the first IDA project that was exclusively residential, the first ever. And they've tweaked it a little bit, that I think they've added like 4 commercial jobs after I started pushing back about it being exclusively residential. But part of the issue here is the precedent that's set. And the same thing happened in the town of Montgomery, by the way. And the local, some of the local officials defeated this one. Was also an exclusively residential development, would have been the first residential pilot in the town of Montgomery IDA's history. We defeated it a few months ago. The precedent here is you give out one of these and you better believe every single residential developer for all time moving forward is going to come to the IDA and say, well, you gave a pilot to them, where's mine? And so that's in Ulster County, and other than some noise I've made, hasn't really gotten a lot of attention. And there needs to be a lot more pushback on that project. So part of the problem here is we need someone, maybe a person in each county, a person in each region, but it takes some work. And we've got to identify these problem applications to know to light a fire under people in those communities.
No, it did get attention. And I think the reason they were able to sneak that one through is because, at first we thought that the Kingstonian was because of the garage, until you really read the application very carefully. And in fact, it was for the residential portion. And that's how they snuck it through. And that set the precedent for the Marlborough development that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't find, even on the IDA website, you can't find out. It was Jim who sent me the actual schedule that was approved. It's not on the IDA website. Can you believe it or not, the pilot that was approved? I'm sorry, Jim, Bruce, you haven't had a chance to talk. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, Senator, I spoke with your chief of staff on Friday, and I hope her enthusiasm, it was as vibrant as it came over the telephone to me that something was going to be done about this. And, you know, she said she would get back to me, or I could get back to her, or what have you. You know, this is a bad deal, but this is one of many bad deals. We've seen the Osmond Tower Governor Clinton deal where private investors were given money to allow their property to depreciate, to walk away, and then new people come in. We have a healthcare building out in the town of Ulster, Caremark, assessed for $40 million, does not pay any taxes. A Holiday Inn that has a pilot on it in the town of Ulster. Now, how can the Marriotts out in the town of Ulster compete with a Holiday Inn when the Holiday Inn doesn't have to pay any taxes? So, you know, whatever the number is per room, their rooms can be cheaper. Now we have a deal with
Hotels should
Kia.
not get pilots as a general practice. You build a hotel because you think that there is a need for rooms in that community.
Well, let me
If you
tell you,
don't think
they
there's a need
have,
for rooms in that community, you don't build the hotel. It's not as if
They
you gotta
have.
like draw a hotel to a community. They come here thinking that they can sell rooms. The
And
same
do
thing,
you
by
know-
the way, with distribution. We should not give a pilot to a single warehouse in all of New York State.
you're
Why?
absolutely correct.
Why? Because we do not have to attract them to New York State. Amazon comes to Montgomery in Orange County because they see on their map, we need better distribution in this area. We need to get our Amazon Prime customers their stuff a little faster in this area. We need a warehouse in the Hudson Valley. We don't have to go out and recruit these folks. It's
So now
crazy.
we have a car dealership that
I'm aware of
wanted a
that one.
pilot. All right, they weren't given the pilot, so they went through some other agency which is dedicated to lending money for nonprofits. Since when is a car dealership a nonprofit? They're going to take 4 jobs from the Honda and give it to Kia. They're going to take 4 jobs from Toyota. How can the guy at Honda sell cars when the guy at Kia doesn't have to pay any taxes? And this, you know,
And not only that,
It's-
they lied on their application.
well, I don't know what you know.
They did. They lied about
but
taxes
the
on
fact
their
of the
application.
matter is, the Kingstonian is a horrible deal, and how do we stop it? Can the legislature put a halt to IDAs right now until this thing is reviewed? Yeah, you know, Senator Ort and Barkley on the other side of the aisle. I mean, what does it take to make this happen?
If I can just add something about the Holiday Inn, the largest shareholder of Intercontinental Hotel, which owns the Holiday Inn, is JP Morgan Chase. So we should be very glad to know that Jamie Dimon and his fellow paupers are being subsidized by the school
Well,
children. in
well,
Kingston.
so is the guy from Amazon there, Bezos or whatever.
Yeah.
And we
this
can
Lake,
go on and on.
and the Lake Champlain one, it's wholly owned by Blackstone. So Stephen Schwartzman needs the school districts, our school
All
districts.
right,
money
but
very
we've got to focus on Kingston, New York, and how do we resolve Kingston, Ulster County, and what it's doing to the tax base here in sales tax, in real estate tax. And half of this money is really state tax money because 50% of the sales tax goes to the state. A percentage of the mortgage taxes go to the state, and certainly the whatever money the state gives to the schools is based on whatever their tax rate is. So there's a convoluted way that the state's paying for this mess indirectly. So how do we stop it? And how fast can we stop it? Senator, I'm done. Thanks for your time on Friday with your aide, and I hope we can move forward. It appears, you know, Kingston's is part of Ulster County, and you do have a couple of towns in Ulster County, so you can help us.
I was just gonna jump in here and say, Sandy posed the question and you posed the question as well, Bruce. It's like, what can we do about this? And we're doing it right now, right? I mean, this is part of the action that needs to be taken, is sharing this information with more and more people, building a coalition around these issues, and really, challenging the IDA in terms of whether or not this is a real good investment for the community. What is the benefit to the community? Sandy talked about community benefit agreements. But, the reality is that, I applaud the school district first and foremost for rejecting this pilot proposal, right? I mean, we've seen research now. We know that schools in upstate New York alone in 2019 lost about $378 million to IDA related financing and projects. 87 school districts lost between $1 million and $10 million. And 3 of these districts, Peekskill, New Rochelle, and Rensselaer, lost over $10 million in 2019 alone. So, these programs are not working well. We need to make sure, I think at the local level, especially too, that the school districts are engaged in this as well in terms of school boards and whatnot. And they should literally have a seat on the IDA because, the IDA is giving away their money.
Well, they did have a seat on the IDA, but when they voted the wrong way, the chairman took a seat away.
Right. Well, I think the reality is, right, we've been doing the same thing for a very long time. I use my disco ball here. Since about the 70s when disco was in fashion, right? We got rid of disco. I think we can start to get rid of some of these programs that have been around for a long time and are simply not working. So
I also correlated the minority percentage of students in school districts with the amount of the amount of pilots in Ulster County. I couldn't get the Ellenville School District because it stretches into Orange County, but it's not a straight line, but there's a pretty strong correlation. The more the minority students, the more the pilots. And it's just wrong. That's discrimination. That's de facto discrimination. Jim.
Well, there needs to be, I want to thank Senator Skoufis. We need a public advocate. It can't be volunteers. The school board is a volunteer job. I put countless hours in on the school board and I don't get paid for it. And I go up against these, developers that are getting big bucks. And finally we got a little bit of an effort, a little bit of a win on the Kingstonian when I joined a lawsuit calling for a new public hearing. And I paid, and I engaged my own lawyer for that. It's outrageous. There needs to be a public advocate that's funded, that has money for litigation. And a newspaper reporter for Hudson Valley One called me on Thursday or Friday and said he wanted to know. They told him that the last public hearing on January 12th, they couldn't do it remotely. They couldn't do it virtually or offer a remote option because the George Washington Elementary School didn't have enough bandwidth. I thought that was the most stupid thing I've ever heard. Kingston City School District probably has more bandwidth than the rest of the city of Kingston combined. We had 340 students doing virtual learning for a whole year or 18 months out of George Washington Elementary School. That it doesn't have bandwidth for a public hearing? And and he said he was told that by a common council member. It's just filled with lies.
It was rigged. It was rigged. And you know what? I was booed and Cheryl was booed and you were booed because they had it rigged. They had so many people there. And the other problem is that Brad Jordan sits on the police commission. And there was a little dust up between someone, I'm not even going to say who, although maybe she might tell us who she is, and Tony Davis, who's a councilman who really, really supports the Kingstonian. There was a little dust up and a police officer was very rude to Cheryl and he hugged Tony Davis afterwards, who's that councilman. And I said to the police officer, you really shouldn't let your opinion show. And, I saw you hug him. He said, I didn't hug him. I said, excuse me, I saw that with my own eyes. And he said, well, I patted him on the shoulder. And then he looked at me, he did the policeman's thing. And he looked at me real tough and he said, you need to leave. And I left, but I was a little shocked because Brad Jordan sits on the police commission. He is the shadow mayor of this town, and the police. So he's got this alliance. He's got the police. He's got his PR team that he pays good money to. And what do we have? We have a bunch of volunteers who do this for free. It's just, he's got lawyers who plan, who strategize this stuff well in advance to get around public opinion. And they're very, very concerned about public opinion. That's something that matters to them a lot. And I don't know why. There has to be a legal loophole in there somewhere, a legal chink in their armor. And that's why they care so much about public opinion, because they rigged that last hearing.
So is there anything people can do? Ilona, there's a vote on Tuesday, correct?
There is a vote on Tuesday, and what we're hoping is that people and the citizens will really let their alder people know what they think of this. I would love to see people come and tell their alder persons.
Ilona, can the senator, because public funds are involved, get a temporary restraining order or whatever to postpone this until there's an investigation? The controller and the district attorney should really be down here investigating this before it gets out of hand. Because once it starts, it's not going to stop. You're giving away public property, the parking garage, as well as the street to these developers at no cost to them. And so it's more than just the pilot. It's giving away of public assets. And, he talked about we need a public advocate. Would the senator be willing or find someone who could be a public advocate to just get a temporary restraining order on this until it's since taxpayers' money is involved, until it's further investigated?
Well, I don't know.
I'm putting you on the spot, Senator. I'm sorry.
No, look, you're not going to like the answer, but there is no paid public advocate that exists today. And there won't be one that exists on Tuesday when this vote happens. The way to offer a legal remedy like you're describing is to file an Article 78 lawsuit, which I'm sure you're familiar with, because I think there have been Article 78s filed.
Not mine, but somebody else's.
And the only people who have standing to do that are affected taxpayers, not random state legislators who don't even represent Kingston. An affected taxpayer that lives within the Kingston School District or the city of Kingston.
So Rashid is asking, has anyone filed an ethics complaint with the Attorney General's office? And that's a great question. I don't know the answer. Now, I know I looked at today, I looked at the state controller's opinion on General Municipal Law 18, something about public corruption. And it was really very dense. And it looks like there are a lot of outs for this cast of characters. But I can certainly start posting. When you look at the totality of 5 years of the putrid and tainted corruption that Jim was talking about earlier, when I look at what I wrote, it looks like the opening statement of a RICO lawsuit. Not that I'm a lawyer, but it's really very impressive in terms of skullduggery and chicanery that's happened over the years. So the next steps after that, after the Tuesday vote, we're going to have a site plan hearing, which this is, Jennifer, about this stuff. Apparently there's a site plan hearing, and then there's, Jennifer, you tell us.
Site plan review process is more than a hearing, although there is a public hearing during that time. But site plan review involves a number of steps, and it will also include, as you asked earlier, the recreation fee to be set, which is to a great extent at the discretion of the planning board. So there there are a number of steps which involve looking at the site plan from every standpoint, engineering. They've already done the environmental review, but it doesn't mean, oh, so, and Victoria is mentioning that they may need a variance as well. Yes, I think they actually need a few different variances. So that'll have to go to the zoning board of appeals as well. Anytime that they require any kind of variance on use or dimensions, which in this case, I believe both are going to be required, but I'm not certain. I haven't looked at all the details. They have to go to the zoning board of appeals. So it's going to be a lengthy review process. And it's an opportunity for community members to pay attention to what is being presented and what is being represented at that time. And then at a certain point, they will have to set a public hearing. I'd have to review Kingston's site plan review code to see exactly when they set it, but it's typically set after preliminary. And then there's generally also a final review. So that's what I can tell you. I think that that's an opportunity, but it's not obviously going to undo the past.
Boy, I just wanted to say something about the parking, which has been a huge fig leaf, and the numbers simply don't add up. They said that this garage is for the public. Well, if the garage was for the public, why do they need a variance? Why does Brad Jordan, why is he putting parking spots in his garage? If in fact excuse me, why is he making new parking spots in his mall, in his parking lot, if the garage is sufficient? It's not.
So let me just explain. A variance is not a matter of opinion. It's more a matter of what is actually written down in the zoning in terms of allowed dimensions, if we're talking about area variance. And then they have to make an appeal that the benefit outweigh the cost to the community, and the tests that are there, the litmus tests for an area variance, aren't very strict. So they can receive an area variance if they can make that case. But that is also a public meeting. The public has the right to, generally there's a public hearing for that, and the public has the opportunity to speak there to say whether or not that outweighs, the benefits outweigh the cost. And because the zoning board of appeals is a quasi judicial body, they're not typically allowed to draw their conclusions on the basis of popularity. They have to make those findings on the basis of the law and the evidence. So again, there's another opportunity that was just pointed out to us by others. So I'm interested to see how this goes along. And as Senator Skoufis said, it really is going to require, actually all of the speakers have said this, it's going to require the public to become more educated about this process and to continue to speak up when the evidence shows an opportunity.
Rebecca's calling in, Cheryl. She has a couple of questions, and while you figure out how to let her in, there's one thing I'd like to point out, which is that the city is giving twice as much land to this project. The city is giving about 1.6 acres to this project, whereas Brad Jordan himself is contributing about 0.8 acres in his in the two lots that he's combined into one. So I just, when I realized that we're contributing twice as much, so 2/3 of the land for the Kingstonian is from we the people, that kind of blew me away.
I apologize. I have to call it a night and get to the baby. But I really applaud all the work that all of you are doing, and certainly look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
having me.
much for coming.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Is Rebecca on?
I'm trying to unmute. I thought I said it, I have everybody unmuted themselves.
So I think she's
I'm-
pointing out,
I'm here.
I think she's pointing out that it's also the parking lot land, which was
She
public.
says she's here.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, everybody. So, I'm sorry I missed Senator Skoufis. I was thinking a little bit about the question about what can be done, and maybe this was asked earlier. I guess I'll just put this on the table, because I would have really been interested to hear the senator's opinion about whether or not DRI funding can be moved from one project to another. And I know that we've gotten some confirmation that, in fact, you know, if there's a project where DRI funding is allocated and the project doesn't make it, what happens to that funding? Does it stay within the community? Can it be reapplied to a project that had been identified in that specific grant? But now he's gone, but I think that would be great to get confirmation on, even though it's very late in the game. Anyway, that's all I've got.
The
Thanks for
Department of
putting this
State,
together.
the Department of State said yes. They sent me an email and it's in their literature.
Right, no, I would have liked to have heard the
So
senator's opinion
I
of that.
asked him on chat, and he said, this is Cheryl, by the way, Rebecca, get a lot of people to encourage them to work on IDA reform. They both know, meaning our senators, that I'm very engaged on this issue. And then he said, there are many bills, but on the Kingstonian, that's up to you all. It's not my district, so not my place. So we basically have to go to Senators Hinchy and Martucci, because there are senators, and we have to get them to work on this, is what he's basically saying. So but I'll put that out there. We're gonna have a follow-up on all of that.
Actually, one other question that would be interesting to hear from the senator is what's the update on prevailing wage? And how does that impact now private developments? We know that they impact public, but that there was, I'm not sure if it's complete or not, but just the outcome and how that's all going to round out and impact projects like the Kingstonian, that is a public-private partnership with prevailing wage.
Ron, do you know about that? No, that's going to probably be in the new budget, right?
Well, I think that what's happening now with that is that Governor Hochul, and I don't have my notes and I'm driving in the car, but that there needs to be some form of committee created to, in fact, this is something that was stated by Rose, the executive director from the Ulster County IDA. So it doesn't sound like it's clear how this is all shaping up, but I think that's really important to understand, because that's going to be, well, it's a good thing, prevailing wage for all, but it could really impact projects like the Kingston that's identified as a project that could be impacted by something like that, given the amount of taxpayer dollars. I think the threshold is 30% of their budget, or something to that effect. 30% public funds, and I think that Kingstonian is beyond that. So that's
Well, We should
sure.
definitely look into that. That could be something that we look into next. Look, we've been on now for an hour and a half, an hour and a quarter, and it was supposed to be 1 hour. So I want to thank Ron and Sandra. Thank you so much for coming. And all of you who've contributed, thank you so much for your comments. And yeah, we need to put our heads together and find out what to do next. That should definitely be the next plan of action. What can we do? So Ron and Sandra, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. It was wonderful. I hope we can stay in touch.
Thank you for
We
having
will.
us.
And
be
move-
Thank you.
Be
Have a
happy to
good night.
continue this conversation with you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.